At 9:27 a.m. on December 13, 1943, Second Lieutenant Philip Adair pulled his Curtiss P-40N Warhawk into a climbing turn over Assam, India, as 64 Japanese aircraft materialized through the morning haze 3 miles east, heading directly for his base at Dinjan Airfield. The 23-year-old Adair had flown 43 combat missions with the 89th Fighter Squadron protecting the Hump airlift. But this morning, he was the only pilot airborne when the formation appeared. In the previous 8 weeks, Japanese raids on Allied airfields throughout northeast India had destroyed 47 transport aircraft on the ground and killed 112 personnel. His P-40, nicknamed Lulu Belle and marked with the number 44, carried 650 caliber Browning machine guns and enough ammunition for approximately 12 seconds of sustained fire. The enemy formation consisted of 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers, escorted by approximately 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters, arranged in layers above and below the bomber stream. Intelligence reports indicated that similar-sized raids in Burma had achieved 90% hit rates on undefended airfields. Below him, Dinjan Airfield housed 14 C-47 transport aircraft loaded with critical supplies for Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China, a field hospital treating 63 wounded soldiers, and fuel stocks sufficient to support hump operations for 11 days. If the bombers reached the field unopposed, the damage would Allied supply operations over the Himalayas for weeks. The nearest friendly fighters were 38 minutes away at their base in Jorhat. Adair checked his fuel gauge. Full internal tanks, 180 gallons, approximately 90 minutes of flight time at combat power. The Japanese formation was 3,000 ft below him, moving at 240 mph toward the airfield. Standard doctrine called for fighter pilots to wait for reinforcements when outnumbered more than 5.1. Adair had 64-1 odds. He could radio for help and shadow the formation until support arrived. By then, the WWII bombs would already be falling, or he could attack alone and try to disrupt their bombing run. Adair pushed the throttle forward. His Allison V-1710 engine responded immediately, the manifold pressure climbing to 54 in. The P-40 accelerated to 320 tp. He positioned himself 4,000 ft above the bomber formation, coming at them from the south with the sun behind him. The Oscars hadn't spotted him yet. Their attention was focused forward on the target. He had one advantage. Surprise. The Japanese pilots expected fighters to meet them near the target, not 20 meters out. Adair planned his attack vector. Hit the lead bomber formation first. Ignore the fighters initially. Break their bombing accuracy. Make them scatter. Force them to abort the run. Can one P-40 disrupt 64 Japanese aircraft? Please like this video to see how this turns out. Subscribe for more stories, and let's continue back to Adair. The lead Sally bomber group flew in tight formation, 6 aircraft arranged in 2 Vs of 3. Adair rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and dove at the bombers from their 7-high position. His airspeed built rapidly, 360, mainpunch 360. The P-40's Allison engine screamed at full power. Range closed fast. The bomber crew still hadn't seen him. At 801 T, he opened fire. His 650s hammered, tracers arcing toward the lead bomber. Rounds walked up the Sally's left wing. Fabric tore. Metal sparked. The bomber's port engine erupted in orange flame. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The formation broke. Bombers scattered left and right, their tight V dissolving into chaos. Adair pulled up hard, 7 Gs crushing him into a seat, and rolled right. 40 Oscar fighters were diving toward him. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar was one of the most maneuverable fighters in the Pacific Theater. Powered by a Nakajima HA-115 engine producing 1,150 horsepower, it could reach 329 mph at 13,000 tons an ft and execute turning circles tighter than any American fighter. The Oscar's butterfly combat flaps allowed it to bleed speed rapidly in turns without stalling. Japanese pilots exploited this advantage ruthlessly. In the previous 6 months, Oscars had shot down 63 Allied fighters over Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N was faster in a straight line, but couldn't match the Oscar's turn rate. The Warhawk's Allison V1710 81 engine generated 1240 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, giving the aircraft a maximum speed of 378 mph below 12,000 RFT. But in a sustained turning fight, the heavier American fighter would lose energy faster than the lightweight Japanese aircraft. Standard P-40 tactics against Oscars were simple. Never turn with them. Use speed, hit and run, extend away, reset. Adair couldn't extend away. If he fled, the bombers would reform and complete their attack run on Dinjan. He had to keep pressure on the formation, keep them scattered, keep them nervous, even if it meant fighting 40 Oscars alone. The first 4 Oscars came at him in a loose finger 4 formation from his 10 gauss high. Adair rolled left, pulled the nose up and fired a 2-con burst at the lead fighter. 50 caliber rounds missed high. The Oscar broke right, its wingman followed. Adair reversed, diving away to maintain speed. 2 more Oscars dove from above. He saw them at 400 wide, pulled into a climbing left turn, fired again, no hits. His ammunition counter showed 800 rounds remaining across all 6 guns, approximately 6 more attacks at his current rate of fire. Behind the fighter screen, the Sally bombers were attempting to reform. 3 groups of 6 aircraft each were closing back into formation. If they achieved their bombing V again, they would press the attack. Adair had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached their release point over Dinjan. He rolled out, shoved the throttle to the stop, and dove toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars followed him down. The P-40 accelerated to 405 mph in the dive. The Oscars couldn't match that speed. Adair opened the gap, pulled out at bomber altitude, and lined up on the right-hand Sally formation. Range 300 YD. He fired. Tracers converged on the lead bomber's right engine. The Mitsubishi HA-101 radial engine exploded in a fireball. The bomber rolled right, streaming fire and debris. Its wingman broke formation to avoid collision. Adair kicked rudder, skidded left, fired at another Sally. His rounds punched through the bomber's thin fuselage skin. The Ki-21 had no armor protection for the crew, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Designed in 1936, it was obsolete by 1943 standards, but it could still carry 2.25 pounds of bombs, enough to destroy everything on Dinjan Airfield. The Oscar fighters were closing again, 12 of them this time. Adair's fuel gauge showed 162 gall remaining. His ammunition counter read 650 rounds. The bombers were 19 m from Dinjan. He had perhaps 4 minutes before they reached drop range. Then his engine started overheating. The Allison V1710-81 was a liquid-cooled engine. Coolant circulated through passages in the cylinder heads and block, absorbing heat from combustion, then flowed through a radiator mounted beneath the fuselage. At combat power settings above 50 in of manifold pressure, the engine generated extreme temperatures. The coolant system was designed to handle sustained operation at those settings for approximately 20 minutes. Adair had been running at full power for 11 minutes. His coolant temperature gauge showed 230 degrees F. Normal operating temperature was 210. At 250, the engine would begin to fail. He had 3 options: reduce power to let the engine cool, abandon the attack and return to base, or continue fighting and risk engine failure over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 17 mi from Dinjan, still within bombing range, still a threat. Adair kept the throttle forward. 2 Oscars came at him head-on. Closing speed exceeded 600 mph. Both fighters opened fire at 500 wide. Adair saw their muzzle flashes, 7.7mm tracers walking toward his nose. He fired back. His heavier 50 caliber rounds carried more energy and reached farther. At 350 yards, his rounds hit the left Oscar's engine cowling. The lightweight fighter shuddered, broke left, trailing white coolant vapor. Its wingman followed. Adair rolled right and dove. His coolant temperature hit 240 degrees. The Sally bombers were 15 miles from target. Two formations of 6 aircraft each had reformed into bombing Vs. The third formation was scattered. 3 bombers struggling to rejoin. Adair went for the lead formation again. 6 Oscars tried to intercept him. He dove past them at 390 mph, too fast for them to follow. At bomber altitude, he leveled out and opened fire on the lead Sally. His first burst hit the bomber's right-wing root. The wing structure failed. The outer panel folded upward and tore away. The Sally rolled inverted and entered a spin. No parachutes. The crew rode it down. The formation broke again. Bombers scattered in 3 directions. Their bombing accuracy was destroyed. Even if they dropped now, their bombs would be spread across miles of jungle instead of concentrated on the airfield. Adair pulled up hard. His coolant temperature gauge showed 248 degrees. The engine was running rough. He could feel vibration through the control stick. Detonation was starting in the cylinders. Pre-ignition from excessive heat. If he didn't reduce power soon, the engine would seize. 8 Oscars dove on him from above. He saw them late, rolled left, too slow. 7.7mm rounds punched through his right wing. Fabric tore, metal buckled. 1 round hit his right aileron control rod. The aileron response went mushy. He needed more right stick pressure to maintain level flight. Another burst walked up his fuselage. Rounds sparked off his engine cowling. 1 penetrated the coolant reservoir behind the firewall. Green. Coolant sprayed across his windscreen. The engine temperature gauge climbed past 260 degrees. Steam erupted from the cowling seams. His oil pressure dropped. The Allison was dying. Adair chopped the throttle. The engine RPM fell from 3,000 to 2,400. Not enough power to maintain altitude. The P-40 started descending. 1,000 ft per minute, then 1,500. The Oscars were circling above him, waiting. Then his engine caught fire. Fire in a liquid-cooled. Aircraft engine follows a predictable sequence. First, burning coolant vaporizes and ignites. The flames spread forward along the engine cowling drawn by airflow. If the fire reaches the fuel lines running along the engine's left side, the aircraft explodes. Adair had perhaps 30 seconds before that happened. Standard procedure for engine fires was immediate shutdown and bailout, but his altitude was only 8,000 ft, descending rapidly, and he was 12 mi from friendly territory over jungle where Japanese patrols operated. He kept the engine running. The Allison's fuel mixture could be leaned manually. Adair pulled the mixture control back to idle cut for 3 seconds, starving the engine of fuel. The fire intensity decreased. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine coughed, caught, continued running, but rough. Power output had dropped to approximately 60%. Not enough to climb, barely enough to maintain level flight. He was committed to flying home on a burning, damaged engine or abandoning the aircraft over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 13 mi from Dinjan, still close enough to turn back and attack, but their formations had disintegrated. Individual bombers were heading southeast toward Burma. The raid was broken. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Naguli, 43 mi away. Approximately 15 minutes of flight time if the engine kept running. 6 Oscars followed him. At 7,000 ft, his engine oil pressure dropped to 0. The Allison ran on oil pressure to lubricate its connecting rods, crankshaft and camshaft. Without oil pressure, metal ground against metal. Friction generated heat. Heat caused expansion. Components seized. Adair felt the engine vibration increase. The propeller began windmilling unevenly. Power output fell further. His airspeed dropped to 180 mph. The P-40's stall speed was 120. He was losing the margin between controlled flight and falling. Behind him, the Oscars, closed to 400 yards. They didn't fire. They were watching, waiting for the engine to fail completely, waiting for him to bail out or crash. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face. The Japanese pilot gestured downward. "Land the aircraft. Surrender. Become a prisoner." Adair ignored him. At 6,000 FT, smoke began filling his cockpit. Not from the engine fire, from electrical wiring behind the instrument panel. The rounds that had hit his fuselage had severed control cables and damaged the electrical system. Smoke burned his eyes and throat. He slid the canopy open. Wind blast cleared some of the smoke, but the slipstream made breathing difficult. His airspeed fell to 160 mph. The Oscars backed off. They weren't going to waste ammunition. The American pilot was already dead. His aircraft was crippled. The engine was dying. He would crash in the jungle. They circled higher, watching him descend. At 4,000 FT, Adair's right aileron control cable snapped. The aileron flopped to full deflection. The P-40 rolled right, and the nose dropped into a dive. He hauled back on the control stick with both hands. Nothing. The elevator cables were damaged. He had no pitch control. The nose stayed down. His airspeed increased. 200 a maf. 220, 250. The jungle rushed up at him. Altitude 3,000 ft, 2,500, 2,000. He was going to crash. Then he had an idea. The P-40's damaged aileron was forcing the right wing down. The broken elevator cables left the horizontal stabilizer in a nose-down position. Gravity and aerodynamic forces were pulling the aircraft into an uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work in both directions. If Adair rolled the aircraft inverted, the damaged aileron would force the right wing up instead of down. The elevator, stuck in nose-down trim, would push the tail down, lifting the nose up. Flying upside down would reverse the control inputs. The damage that was killing him right side up might save him inverted. At 1,800 FT above the jungle, Adair rolled the P-40 completely inverted. -1 G pressed him against his shoulder straps. Blood rushed to his head. His vision turned red around the edges. The fuel system designed for positive G loads struggled to feed fuel to the engine inverted. The Allison coughed, sputtered, nearly quit, then caught again, running rough but producing power. The nose came up. The descent slowed. At 1,200 FT, the P-40 leveled out, flying upside down. At 140 mt/amp, Adair held the inverted attitude for 40 seconds. His airspeed increased to 160. He was climbing slowly, 50 ft per minute, but climbing. Then the fuel starvation problem returned. The engine began cutting out. He rolled right side up. The damaged controls immediately pushed the nose down. The P-40 descended again, 600 FT per minute. Adair waited until he lost 300 FT, then rolled inverted again. The nose came up. He climbed 200 FT before fuel starvation forced him to roll upright. The pattern repeated upside down to climb, right side up to let fuel feed properly. Flip, climb, flip, descend, flip, climb. The 6 Oscars circling above watched this impossible display. An American P-40 with a burning engine and damaged controls, flying alternately inverted and upright, refusing to crash, clawing for altitude with the determination of a wounded animal refusing to die. One Oscar dove to investigate. Adair saw him coming, rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly at the Japanese fighter. The Oscar broke away. The American pilot was either insane or desperate. Either way, the Oscars decided not to engage. They turned east toward Burma. Adair continued his rolling climb toward Nagali. His fuel gauge showed 83 gall. His oil pressure gauge showed 0. The needle had been pegged at 0 for 9 minutes. The engine should have seized by now. Connecting rods should have welded to the crankshaft. The fact that it still ran defied mechanical logic. The Allison was running on momentum, friction, and whatever microscopic oil film remained on its internal components. His altitude reached 3,000 ft, then 4,000. The base at Naguli was 21 mi southwest, approximately 11 minutes away if he maintained current speed. His coolant temperature gauge no longer registered. The needle had melted off at some point. Smoke still poured from the cowling, but the flames had died down. Either the fire had consumed all available fuel, or the lack of coolant had somehow starved it. At 5,000 ft, Adair spotted Naguli Airfield ahead, the runway, the tower, the revetments, safety. But he faced a new problem. His landing gear was hydraulic. The hydraulic system ran on engine power. His engine was producing minimal power and might quit completely any second. If he lowered the gear and the engine died, he would crash short of the runway with the gear down. If he kept the gear up and tried a belly landing, the impact might rupture his remaining fuel tanks and the aircraft would burn. He needed the gear down and locked before the engine failed. He reached for the gear lever. His right hand was shaking, not from fear, from carbon monoxide poisoning. The cockpit smoke had been accumulating for 14 minutes. He pulled the gear lever down. Nothing happened. The P-40's hydraulic system operated at 1,000 lb per square in.